So what I'm going to do to give you a little bit of a brief, I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to who we are, and then one of the other presenters who's a part of the group is going to give you a little bit of history, more to the group, and then part of what makes us us. So Lisa just introduced herself. My name is Ty Mansfield. I did my undergraduate here at BYU. I did my master's in marriage and family therapy at a small Christian university in Texas called Abilene Christian University. And then I did my doctorate at Texas Tech University. And I've been up here. And so for the last 5 years, I've been teaching adjunct at BYU in religious education. And then I also have a full-time clinical practice here in Provo. And so this is maybe the 5th year, I think, that we've done something along these lines. Jonathan and I and a colleague, Justin McFeeters, have facilitated this 3 or 4 times. And one of those times, we invited what was then called the Group of 8, as they were just getting started. I joined the group about 3 years ago, but they had been going for about 1.5 years at the time. There still really wasn't much of a public presence. And then as Jim Struve, who will introduce him in just a second, was kind of part of the bringing together. He's going to introduce some of the history of the group and how we came together ultimately. He has more history with the group. So anyway, so part of this, just to introduce us very briefly, we're called the Reconciliation and the Growth Project. And at one point, they were the Group of 8, and as we were doing this summer seminar series, we invited the Group of 8 to come and actually present their kind of the story and the work that we were doing around finding a common ground approach to addressing sexual orientation issues. Right? If we were to bring, because as you know, these issues are very sensitive, they can become very political very fast. And so to come together and to say, okay, how do we understand, where do we agree on all of these issues, and can we identify some common values and a common approach in honoring sort of the great 2 commandments or mother ethics of mental health, client self-determination, and do no harm. And so the 4 of us, again, Ty Mansfield, you met Lisa. I'm going to have Jim Struve come up and just introduce himself here for a second. Do you want to do that? Just a brief introduction of you, and then I'll introduce you when we do your part.
Okay. Yes, I'm Jim Struve, LCSW. I'm in private practice up in Salt Lake. I moved here back in 2001, 2002 from Atlanta, where I've been living for 28 years. I grew up in Wisconsin, so I was missing winter. And honestly, that's what brought me here. I've been coming out here and spending so much time, I decided it'd be cheaper to live here than to keep traveling back and forth. So
skier.
Yeah, skier. I love the mountains, and I fell in love with the whole culture here and environment here, so that's why I'm here. I've been doing practice for about 40 years. I work primarily with sexual trauma and a lot with men who've been sexually traumatized, and that brought me with the intersection a lot with LGBT issues and sexuality and gender. So when I came here, my goal was to have a small little practice doing growth clients and spending my time skiing, and here I am working harder than I've ever worked in my life, doing all these other sorts of things. So I'm glad to be with you. And I think when I was here last time was my first time ever on the BYU campus, so enjoyed being back and having a chance to do this.
And Jerry Bowie, another member of the group. Do you want to come introduce? We're just getting started, Jerry. If you want to just introduce yourself briefly. So we're 4 to introduce. So let me get here. This is basically the overview of the group. This is, oh, there's no picture there. There's supposed to be a picture here, but this is there's 10 of us, or 11 of us now? 10 of us. 10 of us. And there's 4 of us that are here doing this presentation today. So the group of us is bigger. Jerry is one of that group. You want to introduce yourself?
So they do creative movement when we do.
A little trauma-sensitive yoga.
My name is Jerry Bowie. I'm a clinical social worker. I actually graduated from this school in 1992. And I currently teach at the University of Utah College of Social Work. In the 90s, I started a private practice, Pride Counseling, which I developed as in my thinking, an easily accessible place for people to go for safe counseling in terms of LGBT issues. So in the 90s, it wasn't so safe. I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, and what else? That's it, I'm good.
So, what you have in front of you, and if there is anyone that doesn't have one, you should have a two-sided document, one of which has 10 core principles. These will be part of the presentation today, and then the other side of that is a no harms document that we recently just finished preparing in the last. We integrated the last updates, the most recent updates, incorporating more feedback just in the last week. And so what you have is kind of hot off the press as of this afternoon. But this is a no harms document that we've all been working on. We'll talk more about that as we get further into the presentation. But so this is the group. What we want to do, what I want to start with, and actually in an earlier year, Jonathan facilitated a little bit of a dialogue around developing a personal value statement. And so that's what we want to start with today in looking at, what are you coming to the table with? And then we'll talk more about the work that we've been doing around sexual orientation, gender identity issues in a therapeutic environment. So with this personal value statement, can I have somebody that would be willing to read this for us? Booming, please.
The process of family therapy revolves around people and relationships, not intervention, techniques, or theoretical abstractions. The therapist, as a human being, is pivotal. Theory and technique come alive and take form only when filtered through the personhood of a therapist.
That title's wrong, but the idea is that you're the instrument, right? In a therapeutic, I didn't change it when I created this slide, but you're the instrument, right? In the therapeutic setting, and so being very clear about you and what you're bringing, and it's important because this therapy is a relationship; it's a negotiation with the client that you're working with in the office. And as the instrument, it's important, one, for you to be aware, and two, appropriately transparent about what you're bringing to the table, and at the very least, you being aware of what your biases are. And so developing what we call the personal value statement is key. So there's basically three major considerations in bringing this together. One is what are our professional ethics? I think everybody here is an MFT. Are there anybody that's not in MFT that's here? LCSW. LCSWs, raise your hands. Oh, sweet, raise your hand. Okay, so MFTs? Anybody that's not MFT or LCSW?
I'm a student.
Just student at BYU? Psychologist, okay. So nice. So depending on what one thing that you'll need to be aware of is what are the stated values around social work or MFT, the professional ethical outlines around dealing with these issues or addressing LGBT clients, and then the other is mental health law, which is going to be governed in state-specific ways. And then the final is what are your personal values, right? And your personal values and what informs those values. Each of these are going to intersect in different ways. If there are conflicts between these three, how do you address those conflicts? So in terms of professional ethics, for MFT, these are some of the ethical considerations to be aware of when you're working with sexual or gender minority clients. Right? We've got non-discrimination. Marriage and family therapists provide professional assistance to persons without discrimination on the basis of race, age, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, disability, gender, health status, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, or relationship status. Non-abandonment. Marriage and family therapists do not abandon or neglect clients in treatment without making reasonable arrangements for the continuation of treatment. seek assistance. Marriage and family therapists seek appropriate professional assistance for issues that may impair work performance or clinical judgment. And then finally, scope of competence. Marriage and family therapists do not diagnose, treat, or advise on problems outside of the recognized boundaries of their competencies. So what happens if someone is coming to you with issues, either they're presenting with issues that are outside of your area of competence, or you get further into therapy and you realize that there's some aspects that they're wanting to address that are outside of your area of expertise. What do you do with that? And just as a quick, even like anything that you guys want to add at any point of this, please feel free to check it out. Okay, mental health law. Various states have outlawed conversion therapy, quote unquote. We'll talk about this and some of the problems with this, both legally and why we've been doing some of the work that we've been doing around this no harms when we get to that piece of it. But various states have outlawed conversion therapy for minors. California is one of those states, but there's a proposal for outlawing any paid service that would seek to alter sexual orientation or gender identity, even outside of the therapeutic office, right? And this is for minors or adults. And I think am I right in saying that this is the first state that's addressed anything with regard to adults as well? There are a few states that have addressed minors. California is the first state to, one, expand that to adults, but two, outside of this isn't just a mental health code. This is more of a kind of a consumer fraud situation, right? So they're expanding that to any paid service, which would apply to coaches, other kinds of groups, and so on. And then, again, we'll talk about as we've come together, what do we see as, rather than just sort of outlining a kind of therapy, how might there be legal code that would more specifically address ethical problems? Personal values. Any thoughts on any of this so far? Professional ethics, kind of questions, thoughts, or mental health? Yes, please.
Conversion, so that idea of conversion therapy, at least within the state of California, would that also apply to religious leaders?
Any paid service?
Any paid service?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So like 12-step programs, things like that are non-paid, that are volunteer or peer-led, would be different. But if it's a paid service, even outside of the therapeutic realm, it would apply. And I think that there's some anticipation that this is going to pass, right? Do you have any idea?
I think there's a lot of public steam to support it as it is right now. So I think it's very possible.
Didn't it pass the assembly?
I don't know.
Okay. So, but I mean, Utah state law is, and so LGBT rights leaders in Utah have been getting some pressure to lead something in Utah. And so we met with the head of Quality Utah recently to discuss what this might look like and how we can be a support in that if they're going to move forward with that in the state of Utah. Yeah.
But one of the problems is most of the 14 states have the conversion bans, but they mostly cover through the licensing body. So therapists who give up their license to become life coaches or religious counselors, etc., if you give up your license and are operating, it doesn't apply to you. So what's happening is it's kind of like prohibition. A lot of people are going out under the umbrella, and the laws don't cover that in any form yet.
Yeah. Which is part of the motivation for California wanting to extend it beyond just mental health.
Because consumers don't understand the difference between license and a different kind of license.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
You said you're going in more detail later about what actually qualifies as conversion therapy.
Yeah, because and the problem with this is that the conversion therapy is a very broad umbrella term that is often used very loosely and isn't really clear about. So what is conversion therapy? People could define that differently or understand that differently. And so to outlaw conversion therapy doesn't really help when it comes to how we identify ethics or eliminate harms that are going to be more nuanced, right? And so what the no harms document, you actually have this in front of you. Again, is there anybody that does not have this who's come in the last couple of minutes? It's a two-sided document. One of them is called the no harms declaration. And we will go over this in a lot of detail so you can see what we're identifying and how it might even play out beyond the scope of conversion therapy per se, right? And that's part of the problem is that someone might not be doing conversion therapy per se, but still facilitating therapy in a way that causes harm to the client. And so our work has been to really try to identify how to eliminate harms across the board, regardless of your approach, regardless of the model that you might be employing in the therapeutic process. And there was another hand over here too. Did you have your hand up?
I just wanted to, I have a lot of questions about this, but you said you're going to go into it one later. So
With the no harm specifically, yeah.
well, specifically like conversion therapy and what your opinions are on that and why. I mean, like, I have a lot of
Well, yeah.
keep my ears open.
Yeah. So here's what, for this purpose, what I want you to do, what we would invite you to be thinking about now is, where's your starting point? Right? What are you, if someone was to come to you today in counseling, are you aware of your own biases? Are you aware of what the professional ethical codes are that govern social workers or MFTs or psychologists? Are you aware of what state law currently might say about those things? Or, because again, the political scene, we're on the front side of what might be happening politically around these issues, right? And we've seen a lot of things that have come up in other states as religious values have come into conflict with either ethical codes or legal codes, that kind of thing, right? So, personal values, again, is this other informing piece. So what are your values based on your experiences, personal, on your religious or spiritual beliefs, your political beliefs? And priests, there was a piece in 2018 that was Family Review, or what was remember the journal?
Temperate family therapy.
But they were identifying the difference between narratives and values. And these are different. So how do our narratives, narratives are developed around numerous experiences and they inform our values. And if you're interested in that, I can send you that piece afterwards. But sort of understanding we're all kind of operating within various narratives. And our narratives are informed by culture, by religious tradition, by a number of things. So what are by personal experiences, family experiences, family beliefs, family culture. And so when it comes down to this, and especially as BYU students or as Latter-day Saints, what are LDS teachings on sexual and gender minority concerns? And how do those, what is your understanding of those teachings? Because I've heard people say that the church teaches fill in the blank when that's not what the church teaches. Right? Or how might various statements that have been made in the past that are part of a culture of teaching even be in conflict with core doctrines? Right? And are we able to tease culture of teaching out from core principles? How do those inform your personal values? Right? And then how can you square your responsibilities as a therapist and your personal values and ethics in the therapy room? Right? Because every single one of us is going to work at some point with somebody whose values differ from yours. If that didn't happen the first time you ever sat before a client, right? So this is always going to happen, and so being aware of that and how you navigate those differences in therapy is important. Any thoughts on this? Did you want to say something about the values?
Yeah, I probably do. If now's a good time.
Yeah.
How do I want to start this? I've tried to add it up, and I think I've seen about 4,000 sessions with LGBT clients, most of whom were Mormon at some time in their lives or are still practicing, even temple recommend carrying Mormons. And they've all been coming to therapy for one reason or another. And as you imagine yourself there, which you probably already have, some of you many times, I know already, what comes up for you? What is it that, what do you find your biggest concern as you're sitting there? What moves you? What is it that you want to have happen? how would you begin to answer that question, just in a really general way? Who will be brave? Yes.
It's so easy to love the person in the room with you.
To love the person in the room.
Yeah, it's easy to want what's best for them. At least that's my experience, and then also being torn, like what. I mean, we can't truly be neutral. Like we want to believe we can be
As human beings,
yeah.
it's impossible.
Like we cannot be neutral. So what can I promote? Like
Can you promote? Oh, I love that question. So yes, all of that is true. That's why it's super important for us to examine it. Yes.
A really close colleague who's also a psychologist in California, she's lesbian, and she struggles with her own internalized homophobia. So if she's struggling with her own internalized homophobia, even though I have a family member who's gay, I always try to be aware of where those biases come, because if she's got it, I know for sure that on some level, because of the way we were raised, even though I think that I don't at all, you know, it's like, it's so interesting because you really have to be aware of like, okay, is that, you know, it's a really,
And your clients will pick up on them,
Yeah.
even if you're not aware of them. Really good point. Yes.
When I've sat in sessions like this before, I have this real helpless feeling. Like, I just sense the conflict, right, between maybe how I was raised or how they were raised, if they were raised LDS, and then with their sexual identity and gender identity and all those things, it's just this conflict, and I feel this helplessness. Like, how do you reconcile these things that feel so opposite? And it feels really daunting.
Yeah, because as a therapist, you want to be helpful. And is it helpful to do this, or is it helpful to do that? Am I making it worse if I offer this? Or am I pushing you away from something that's really helpful to you if I offer that? It's hard to know what's going to be helpful, isn't it? Yeah. Great. Other things, yeah.
Speaking from having LGBT in my office and such, is I want them to be healthy, whatever that entails. I just want them to be healthy and alive. And if they're both those, I don't care what they choose to do. It's their choice. It's not my choice. And I just want them to be healthy and alive and be able to go on with their journey, wherever their journey goes. Because my journey took me weird places. Why in the world wouldn't yours? You know, and I just want them to be okay.
You've thought about this quite a bit. And with regard to health, does that mean different things? Somebody who wants a client to be healthy might make certain assumptions about what creates health. Yes? What thoughts might you be having of that kind in the therapy?
Can I ask a question about her statement?
Yes.
Because I heard the word healthy and okay. So I'm just wondering what qualifies as being okay, what qualifies as healthy? Because how I see health may look very different in terms of relationships, intimacy, physical. So I'm kind of wondering what qualifies as okay.
And you can answer that. I was opening it up to everybody, but I love it if you want to follow up.
In some ways, I would think of it as general qualifier for everybody. If you're in a relationship, I want to make sure you're not being taken advantage of in that relationship. You know, I want to make sure that, you know, it's mutual, that it's cared for, that there is respect and honor with whatever sexual orientation, gender orientation you have to have general respect in your relationships. I want to make sure that you are not doing behaviors that could potentially leave you in more harm than good. So, you know, if you're, you know, to make sure that you're not cutting yourself, make sure you're not like harming your body, harming your heart in ways that leave you vulnerable to pain in a very disastrous way. You know, pain's okay. You know, we have to have pain in life, but if it's disastrous pain, then there's a chance you might not live past it. That's a problem. Or if there's a chance you're going to be in massive debt because this person is taking advantage of you in your relationship, then that's not okay.
Right, so you can hear as Tasha's talking, and this articulate thing that she shared, that she talks about what is it that's going to cause people pain and what is it that's going to cause people health, that our different values may inform what we think of as unbearable pain especially if we've grown up thinking in eternal terms. And we bring those into the therapy room. Or if when we think of what is being okay and what is health, are we thinking of it in terms of what we believe causes happiness in our own context? These are the kinds of things that maybe we bring in. You and that's.
I was just thinking about this in the larger concept of self-determination, which is the thing I think I struggle with most in therapy, and that is that I want to respect my clients' right to self-determination, but they also often do things that are bad for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a matter of, to me, it's a matter of how can I walk that line between helping them and letting them run their own life, and when I need to be putting in suggestions or interventions. And because my clients don't always know what's good for them.
No, as a matter of fact, if you work with anorexic clients who are absolutely determined to get rid of that fat, if you go with self-determination and you say, okay, I will help you on that goal, you are not contributing to health, right? That's a big example of maybe what you're talking about. And that may seem like far-fetched, but in this situation, history of therapy with this community is that therapists do have a sense of what will bring happiness and what is best for you, even if you don't see it yourself. And that privilege of the therapist has created lots of problems for clients. Sandy?
I find my own personal values as I work through them seeping into the therapy room, and on all, like, wherever I'm at, that tends to come into the therapy room. And when we talk about like these values and what health looks like, I recently had a conversation with the parents of a gay son who, similarly to anorexia, right, they kind of were like, well, we wouldn't support this if he were attracted to children, right? Like, and how can we, and so in their mind, right, there was this like parallel to something that I think as therapists we would say, okay, well, that would not be an indicator of health if they were to act upon that. So what's helpful for me whenever I get kind of lost in that, and I'm still really struggling through that, is going back to whatever model I'm using and saying, okay, I know what I think health is, but according to the model that I've thought would be helpful for this client, what is an indicator of health and how can I track that? And that's been helpful when I just feel...
Lovely. Could you give us an example in a model that comes to your mind?
So I do a lot of narrative therapy, which is a little bit more open than a lot of them. And I find myself that, like, okay, well, when they have a narrative that they think is really helpful for them and I might think is really unhelpful for them, all I have to do is go back to the model and say, okay, but how can we deconstruct what is theirs and what is not? What is helpful for them and they feel helpful for them and what is not? And we just kind of flush through it.
Lovely. Thank you for that. Yes.
So, kind of like as I've been thinking about since that question was posed, is like, what does it mean to be healthy? My first thought was like narrative. We don't really determine that. Kind of let them determine what the definition of healthy is for them. And then as you work through kind of that presenting dominant narrative, figure out if it's saturated with problems or if we can introduce a counter narrative. So kind of let them take the lead for a while until you really understand where they're at so that you can use their language to be able to help them improve.
Wow, sounds great.
I guess like as I'm listening to stuff, I think there are some things that are overall health and that you can stay with, right? So if I have a client, whether it's someone who's in a gay relationship or a heterosexual, I guess you'd say homosexual, heterosexual, I won't be. Anyway, is I want them to practice safe sex, right? STDs, I don't think are healthy in any situation. It's not my place to decide who they should have sex with, but there are safer ways about how you go about having sex, right? It's learning how, kind of the same thing with the narrative of being true and authentic with themselves. So I guess for myself, but somebody else might disagree with me on that, right? Because those are my values.
Exactly.
So as a therapist, I guess where I feel is to be open and honest about where I am coming from. And then if I notice that's creeping in, to share that with my client, and they can choose. With any client, I say, I'm going to throw stuff out there and take it with a grain of salt and push back if it doesn't feel like that. which is easier for some clients than others, right? But it's putting that out there and also recognizing I'm not going to be able to control all those things, and I can just do my best with that. But I do think there are things that are help as far as like, kind of like Tasha was saying, like, yeah, if they're cutting, that means something's going on. There's an indicator that something's
is bottom line. Disease is a pretty good indicator. Something's going right. Remind me of her name? Holly. Holly. Yeah, thanks for that. Yes.
But you have to watch out with that, because I think a lot of people use that I'll throw out whatever and you can take it or leave it kind of approach, when a lot of, specifically this population, is vulnerable. I mean, they are not necessarily in a place to completely discern in those types of situations. So it makes it way more complicated than just to say, oh, well, just if I say something you don't like, just tell me, and that'll be fine. I mean, I tell my clients that, but I mean, how often do they actually tell me that until I have to like tease it out of them that, oh, it seems like you didn't really, they're like.
So that has to be done with extreme caution.
Right.
Excellent, yes. And tell me your name.
Michael. I'd say where it also gets a lot more difficult, because I like narrative therapy myself, but particularly when you're working with these clients, they have two narratives that are competing.
Yes.
And so, like the client I'm working with currently that identifies as LGBTQ, one narrative says, I cannot engage in a gay lifestyle and be a good person. But I want to be a good person, and then that's where they'll often their personal values, religiosity, all that's coming forth. And so you have two narratives in the room that it's like a puzzle that doesn't go together. And it's causing so much depression, anxiety, all these things are coming in the room, and they're wanting you to find a way to put these two pieces together that how their narratives currently are when they first start therapy, they don't go together if you're really honest with it. And I think that's where it becomes really, yes, where it's a lot more difficult than to just say, well, let's try and parse out and figure this out, because there's that problem-saturated account within the narrative, and they have to be the one who determines what goes. But that's hard because they see it as like capital R and capital W, right, wrong.
Often you do. And it's more complicated than if the therapist has a sense of where we ought to end up with these competing narratives.
Absolutely.
And two is often the minimum number of narratives that are there. Yes?
I think just going back to defining what it means to be healthy in a way, I'm going to share a personal experience, but for me, going to church is really hard because I have anxiety. So going to church often involves panic attacks, being depressed after, because it's just a bad experience for me. And when I talk to my family, they're very much, well, your spiritual health is the most important thing, so you should go to church anyways. But I'm a student, I'm going to school, I have a job. If Sundays are the worst part of my week and they leave me exhausted the rest of the week, I can't do that. I have other things that are more important that I have to do. So there is this hierarchy of needs. So when you're looking at health, it should probably be physical health, mental health, and spiritual health probably is farther up. Once you have taken care of those other things, you can be focused on spiritual health. So when you have clients coming in who are LGBTQ, yes, you as an LDS clinician might be going, we need to take care of their spiritual health, but that might not be the main focus. It doesn't need to be the main focus because there are other things that are more detrimental possibly to them.
So you are giving a perfect example of a personal value statement. You have taken a look at the hierarchy of some possible tasks in therapy, and you've said, when I'm meeting with a client who has these concerns, here's what I am likely to put first, second, third. Here's how I am conceptualizing my work with this client. And part of what we will want you to do today is conceptualize your own personal value statement of what it's like to work with these clients, to be able to put into words what motivates you to create what you find as your definition of health for clients. And we assume a lot of them will be similar, but it will help you actually to put it into words. So Ty will lead you more down that pathway.
Joel has something that you can write on. So if you do, I invite you to pull that out. If you don't, But I want you to think of
There's pens out the doorway there, so if you need pens.
Does anybody need a pen? So as we think about these sort of tier, or these, professional ethics, mental health law, personal values, where these intersections happen for you, or how you craft an integrated value statement, this is something that can take some time, but I want you to take a minute to just draft. Offhand, if you were, I'm going to give you an example of what that might look like, and then, or of what a personal value statement might entail, and then I want you to take a second to just, before I show?
Yeah.
Okay, just go ahead and I want you to just take a second, maybe 3 minutes, and I want you to just write down what that statement might look like for you. Are there any brave souls who would be willing to share what you put down? Please.
So I said to honor clients' values, help them work to define them for themselves. So example, kind of what we talked about as ACT, I think is really excellent for that.
Acceptance commitment therapy. Okay.
Promote physical health, what a doctor would assess, for example, if they're eating, sleeping, disease, etc. All of the factors contribute to health. Be authentic to themselves. I like Brene Brown and stuff a ton. Working through shame stuff. Be honest about my biases with my clients. Help them work through their conflicting narratives. Detach from their choices. And as far as me looking at my own, this is how I work with my clients right now, is I trust that God is merciful and realize that I don't understand how things work after death or anything like that. And so letting go of whatever fears I might have and just show love towards my client and helping them go wherever they need to. So I would say those are mine.
Beautiful. Thank you. Anybody else that would be willing to share what you put down? Please.
I had respect for life and living with health in mind helped me the capacity to grow in meaningful ways and finding positive meanings for one's life individually and relationally. You are the expert as to where you need to start and what is happening with you. Therapy as a way station. I'm not here to fix all of your problems or to give you an absolute solution or direction in your life. I'm here to help you rearrange your baggage as you go on your journey. As a straight cisgendered woman, there are several experiences and cultural experiences I do not have access to or an integrated knowledge of. I seek understanding and learning first when your knowledge of this experience goes beyond mine. And then wherever you go and whoever you become, I base therapy on the value of honesty. Living as honestly as possible with oneself and those around you, unless doing so could lead to bodily harm from others.
You didn't do that just now?
Yes.
You did?
Yeah.
Wow, that's thorough. Okay.
I have
Nice.
to think about it.
These are great. Anybody else that would like to share yours? Not after But this is the idea, right? I mean, as you think about this, right? Part of you putting down on paper, because you can, every one of you, I'm sure, have had the experience of, thinking that something's clear in your mind until you give it voice. And then you realize as you're giving a voice that it's not as clear as you thought, or it doesn't sound nearly as sophisticated as you thought in your head, right? These kinds of things. So to put it down on paper can concretize this sort of ethical value or this synthesis of statements, right? So again, we have professional ethics, mental health laws, personal values. In terms of the legal side of things, what do you think about controversial issues like immigration, same-sex marriage, possibilities relative to sexual fluidity or sexual orientation change? Write those down. Right? Can you think and act in harmony with those beliefs and be an ethical therapist? So some examples of this was on the political side. I got these out of order, but I believe that all people on earth are God's children and deserve to be treated with respect and fairness regardless of background, race, or lifestyle choices. These are just ideas of certain values, brief value statements, and then we'll put these together in a value statement. I value a political statement of values. I value a democratic society. I believe that laws regarding controversial topics like immigration policy or same-sex marriage need to be determined by a vote of the people, not solely by a vote in the courtroom. Elected officials should be accountable to the people, right? How would you write a political statement, and then how might you incorporate those into a therapeutic statement? So here's an example of an integrated statement bringing together all three of these. I am a licensed, this is from a colleague, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist who is, I'll let Jonathan own it if he wants to, who is committed to be a positive resource to individuals and families as they respond to issues related to sexuality and gender identity. I do not provide reparative therapy. I am committed to assist clients who seek therapy to address personal, family, or spiritual issues associated with homosexuality, SSA, and gender issues, including those with self-directed purpose of addressing the tension between spiritual beliefs, religious practices, and their own experience of sexuality and gender. I am committed to provide this therapy in accordance with applicable law and ethical standards related to client self-determination. Right? So, as each of you, I would invite you to really put some thought into this, kind of moving forward from here, what this might look like for you, and how you might incorporate that either just for you as a self-guiding value, or possibly even something that you, in an informed consent capacity, as someone is looking to you as a possible therapeutic resource. Yeah.
I really like this idea of being honest with your clients, kind of about where you're at, but I feel like I don't know how to do that without it being like othering, I guess. Like, I just think of my therapist said, just so you know, I'm anti-Mormon, I'd be like, does that matter? Like, is that hard? Like, will that you treat me differently? Like, I think sometimes those like disclosures, I wouldn't have maybe thought that it mattered what their religion was, or where, I don't know. It just, I can't see myself saying to an LGBT client, like, just so you know, I'm LDS. If, like, I think I'd just be like, well, why is that going to be a problem here? I don't know. I just don't know how to navigate that in a helpful way, I guess, you know?
It's tricky. Does anybody else want to speak to that? How might you do that? And when might it be necessary or appropriate? And when might it be unnecessary?
Well, I work in Circle House. I'm the clinical director there, the LGBTQ Youth and Family Resource Center in Provo. And I would say 80% of the people there seeking therapy, it matters to them very much whether the therapist is LDS or not.
But that's because of their perception of what that means.
Absolutely. And it's also because of their perception of what they will feel comfortable disclosing, what they anticipate the judgment will be for them. And we hope that the kind of therapy they would get would be somewhat similar, but there are many different aspects of life that people want to have somebody who has had, you probably want to go see somebody who's skied and understand how important skiing is. I mean, we just have our idiosyncratic things that we want to know. And so when people have idiosyncratic desires to know about a therapist, it's often important to provide that. And I would say if you're assigned a client here at the clinic, that you look over what it says about them and there's something about an LGBT or SSA issue, I think it's likely that one of the first things I want to know about you is how much does your religion inform how you will live? So the question you might ask is, I'm wondering if you're concerned about how I might be coming to this issue. And you might say, you might have these following concerns rather than making them come up with them themselves. I wonder if you're concerned about what I might bring to this. Whether I think that you have a particular path in life, or that you should be going to church and reading the scriptures, and I would bring that into the therapy session. Because I have met with a lot of LGBT clients who first were sent to their families, by their families, to LDS Family Services, and they, from the luck of the draw, got a therapist who believed that that was their primary way of dealing with this, was to become more invested in spiritual life. So they will be interested, and I think it is appropriate to bring that right into the therapy room and say, I wonder if you're interested in what it would be like to have therapy with me. If you, Sam.
I have the privilege of working in a circle with Lisa. I have found it especially helpful. Well, and I've also worked at the BYU clinic, right? Like at the same time, and having people with LGBT backgrounds coming from different like what am I dealing with here within you as a therapist? And I have found that like being explicit is especially helpful when I'm doing family therapy, because I may have a youth who's coming in and saying, I'm trying to navigate living in this religious family, trying to figure out what my sexuality is all about, and then having parents come in and they're very much wanting to know about my religious beliefs for a completely different reason.
Absolutely.
Because am I going to push their child away from any, and so being very explicit about where I'm at and what I am not doing and what I hope to do, I think builds an alliance, because I'm being I'm being very transparent, and I'm kind of modeling what I'm hoping they can do with their vulnerability and things like that. And it has also, sometimes they decide that that's not what they want, right? That I'm active in LDS and figuring my stuff out.
Absolutely. I'll turn it back to you, Tim.
Can I give an example of what that looks like, please? So the reason this is important to me is when I was in New York and first teaching at Syracuse, I was trying hard to get everybody to like me. So I was saying whatever I thought they wanted me to say. One of our really articulate students, who's now calling in a good friend, she's an articulate advocate for LGBT rights, and she said to me, could you just hold still long enough so I can decide if I like you or dislike you? And she said, I can't trust you right now. I know how to dislike people, I know how to like people, but I can't figure out where you're standing. And it was hard for me because I didn't know where I was standing. I mean, the shape-shifting she saw was truly representative of my internal experience. So when we write these things down, they force us to take a stand that we could change tomorrow. We can grow and learn and develop and change the next day. But what happens when we need our clients to like us, because we're new and we're beginning therapists, especially in training, and you desperately want people to think you're competent, even though you're not. It's easy to pretend you're things. You're much better off to say something like, I don't know what it's like for you to come to BYU campus and talk about being gay, but I imagine that might be a little bit of an issue. I bet you're wondering what I think and feel about these issues. Should we start with a conversation about that? And good, I'm not sure, is still more trustworthy than trying to swim around. So I think that's why it's really important. It's about being trustworthy.
Yeah, there's some issues as you're going to counseling. Someone may seek a therapist and you're not interested in what their religious background is. But there may be situations, like right now I'm working with a couple where he has recently left the church. She is very active and faithful and very conservative in her religious beliefs. And those conflicts, and finding a therapist, it was very important to her to have a religious therapist or an LDS therapist. It was very important to him. He resisted that. That's not what he wanted. But if they were going to do therapy, that was one of her conditions. And so they were kind of scouting for a therapist, that if there was an active LDS therapist, that it was someone who could really kind of hold neutral space for them to negotiate their own issues without imposing anything, right? And so the first couple of sessions were sort of interviewing me as a therapist to see how I talked about things. How could I respect his journey no longer as a believer, right? And negotiate, because I'm not there to impose anything. I'm there to help them navigate their own conflicts, right? So there might be certain things where the personal experiences or beliefs of the therapist are very relevant, and other experiences where they're very much not. But to be able to have that conversation, so for me to ask very explicit questions of what is it like for you to how has this been? Has this been a good fit? Have I said anything that's rubbed you wrong, or that kind of thing? Having that conversation with clients can be very, very important. You had a comment or a question? Or a comment?
I was just going to say, one of the things, it took me a long time to figure this out, but there's two things. First, I'm in private practice in Utah, and I find it very hard to not say whether I'm LDS or not LDS, because it matters to everybody that comes in. You can't just say it and then leave it there. You have to talk about it more. But I tend to find that my clients are interested to know that for one way or another. And if if they're not LDS or they have a problem with that, then we can negotiate it and talk about it. But one of the things that I discovered, though, is you can't be afraid of being fired by your clients. It's if we believe in self-determination, they can fire you. I get real frustrated because I work pretty well with young daughters and young women, and I get fired by them all the time because I'm a guy. And I can't do anything about that. And just as when we say our personal value statement, we stick by it, it's about giving them a choice whether they want to be there or not. And I think that we get into a lot of trouble when we either shift around, as was mentioned, or we start to think that every client that doesn't want to see us is a personal indicator of our worth. And I think that's easy to do.
Yeah. Beautiful thoughts. Anything else that anyone would add around this, please?
I find it interesting that you say it's hard. I mean, maybe it's being in Park City where it's not predominantly Mormon, but my faith never comes up, and it could also be that my private practice is mindfulness-based counseling and therapy at Park City, and so people will assume probably that I'm not. It's interesting because nobody, I mean, certainly I have people who come in, whether they're Jewish, and they're saying, you know, just want to make sure you're not, you know, or having couples coming from Heber who've been shamed, sadly, by LDS because there was infidelity, and being the person who was not faithful is the one who gets shamed in session, and so comes in pretty timid. But other than that, nobody ever, I mean, faith, you know, rarely comes up, and maybe that's just Park City because it's so diverse.
Yeah, different worlds.
It's very different than Park
To
City.
give a
That's for
testimony,
sure.
like I have that happen all the time. It drives me nuts because in my head I'm like, well, look, I'm obviously not your average Mormon over here. You know, from the East Coast, I'm biracial, from a one-night stand. Like, there's not like a lot that's going to scream like Utah Mormon. But so it drives me nuts a little bit. But yeah, I've had several clients vet me and ask, like, are you Mormon? How Mormon? What type of Mormon? And I'm like, I'm pretty damn Mormon. And that's the right statement. You know, and like that's me. I am LDS, and I'm very happily LDS, but I'm not going to go and shove my religion down your throat. And at the same time, like, I've also found it very helpful and healing, especially for people who might have had a rough experience with Mormonism, to sit there and like, hey, here is a Mormon. She's actively Mormon, and she can accept me. And, you know, and I can learn to tell my truth to her and not have to be frightened of sharing who I am to this person. And, you know, and so like it's, you know, being part, like, you know, you can get, they can fire you, and it's okay. But they can also sit there and have a really meaningful, deeper experience if you're honest with them and tell them who you are, and then they can experience you in that, like, in that experience. You know, one of my personal beliefs is that relationships heal first. And if you have a good relationship, then there's something that can grow there.
Yeah, beautiful thoughts. Thank you so much. Quick comment here.
Yeah, I was just going to say, therapists don't think we can be afraid of difference or conflict or an issue that comes up therapeutically, partly because that's the very moment for the potential relationship. And here is that moment in therapy where we actually can start to build off of something. How do we connect with them, they can connect with me, and move forward.
Yeah.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah, please.
A lot of times when I tell my clients about that, they're very relieved because they somehow have an impression that that's not an okay question to ask.
Whether you're LDS?
Yeah,
Sure.
of their therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've even had clients say, "Wait, are you LDS? Is that okay for me to ask?" And to me that says that we could, if we don't ask, or if we don't if we don't share our perspective, we might be missing out on something that they don't feel empowered to share about themselves. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you very much. To Sammy and Lisa's statements, sometimes there are, very often, especially around these issues, there will be parents or children who will be looking for different things or have different or competing values in terms of what they want out of the therapeutic process. Very often I have parents who will bring a child to me who, knowing my story, want something like that for their child, and I have to be very clear in the therapeutic process with both the parents and the children in describing and defining what my values are and what my agenda is and what it is not in the therapeutic process, right? And to be able to reassure if my values are to help a child be healthy and sort of navigate this space, the space for them to decide for themselves what they want, part of the therapeutic process may be fostering boundaries with a parent, right? So, but all of this, when people are very interested in what your values are and what your background is and how that affects or doesn't affect you, the way you engage in therapy, these are very, very relevant questions. So for you to get a statement that can articulate, and there's, this isn't, written on stone. This is something for you that can be a fluid and sort of a changing statement over time as your values take shape or may evolve over time. Jerry, Lisa, anything you would add on this before we move on to the next piece?
No, but I think people are probably going to be curious about why parents want to bring their kids to you to be like you. So I hope that comes out.
Now or later? This is probably the end of my.
Okay. Well,
well, maybe we'll talk about more. So think about. I would invite you to spend some time with this after you leave here today. And even what would this look? The next time you have somebody come into you, whether you share, as if there's something that you put in informed consent, or whether this is something that's just informing you, how are you thinking about these issues the next time you're sitting before someone, regardless of what stance they may be having or what they may be looking for. I'm going to turn the time over to Jim to talk about sort of the history of the Reconciliation Growth Project and the guiding document that has informed the work that we do called the Peacemaking Protocol.
I'm certain I've never had a client want to be like me, or certainly parents want to be like me.
You don't know.
No, I'm certain of that.
We talked about it at home.
One thing just to add to it, we're talking about being on the other side of the continuum of not being LDS, not having grown up here, and having very different spirituality and probably politics than a lot of my clients. One of the things I find is that if you're genuinely interested in difference, you'll maneuver through this. Because one of the things that I always tell my clients is we're probably different in a lot of ways. And I look forward to discovering that about you. And is it safe enough? I'll let you know about me. And I'm really, really excited about collaborating because we're different. And I really like my relationships because I have so many people in my life that are completely different than I am and opposite. But I think if you find a way, if that's something that works for you, that can really make this kind of a thing. Because I have very radically different politically, religiously, and otherwise clients for myself, and we just love each other. We get along because it's genuine. I'm not just doing it as a technique. It really is intriguing to me. I guess that kind of leads into, when I moved here, I'd never heard the word reparative therapy before I moved here. So that was kind of a brand new world for me. And I really, all the times I've been coming here skiing since about 1990, spending a lot of time. And I guess I just stayed under the radar that I didn't realize the dominance of the religion here. So it just kind of evaded me, or I wasn't seeing it because I was too busy looking for snowflakes or something. But when I moved here and started my practice, a couple of things happened that really caught me by surprise. First of all, as I began to market myself by saying, 20 years in Atlanta, therapist, whatever, working with gay and lesbian clients, and everybody said, "Why are you doing that so openly? You're not going to be able to practice here. Why are you saying that so out loud?" And they said, "We just don't do that here." And it never occurred to me not to do that. So it was just like who I was, that I was visible. And very quickly my practice began to really take off because people were looking for somebody who was authentically visible and wasn't hiding that. So that really kind of caught me by surprise that it was such a difficult thing here. And then the other thing I found was the history of reparative therapy here, that all the professional organizations had been really at war back in the 90s around this issue. And that because it had gotten so volatile, and Jerry might be able to say more about this because he lived through it, there was debates and things, and each organization kind of resorted to their camps. And the psychologists were doing their thing, but just for psychologists. The social workers were doing their things, but just for social workers. And a lot of it was really kind of underground. And like NASW, which being social worker was part of, they had an LGBT task group that had meetings, but it was only open to social workers. Nobody else could come. And UPA, the psychologists and stuff, it was only open to psychologists. Nobody else could come. And we had the good fortune that probably within the first 3 or 4 months that I was here, NASW decided to dissolve their LGBT task group and their women's task group. So a lot of people I was just getting to know with my networking were lividly angry and upset about NASW because that was being taken away. And there were some of the things that were going on. And then I learned the history about UPA with that. And I've been community organizer and doing a lot of social justice work for most of my career. And what I said immediately was, well, let's start our own organization. And so I said, and why don't we do it where we invite anybody, that it can be multidisciplinary, it can be allies, it can be sexual and gender diverse, anybody who believes in affirmative therapy. So we formed the LGBTQ Affirmative Psychotherapists Guild in late 2003, 2004. We've been going ever since. And the organization, check our website if you want to join, because it's free to students for the first year. And then it's $25 a year after that. And we have about 26 hours of in-service work a year that's free, if you remember. We meet once a month. We have some really exciting programs to do. And we have an ethics conference every couple of years. But several years in, when we were prospering and doing really well, and it was beginning to take off because there was visibility about you can get help even in Utah, and the therapists who were beginning to band together and say it's okay for us to be above board and visible with what we're doing. What began to become obvious is that if we're only, and this I guess is because my role as a therapist grew out of my being a social activist. I became a therapist totally by accident because of my activist work, went back and got my degree. So it also occurred to me that I have to deal with the lives of the clients I'm working with. I can't just stay in my office. So we realized maybe we're building really good therapy, but what are we doing to change anybody's life? Because all we do is they come in, they might get better, they get spit back out, and nothing in the world has changed around them. So it felt like what we have to do is we have to find a cause that would help us change the world for our clients. I do that with sexual assault, which is my other big issue that I work on. It's not going to help if I'm not active in the Stopping Sexual Assault movement, because otherwise it just keeps going and going, and it's a factory of bringing in clients and spitting them out. So the issue that became really high profile was reparative therapy. And we looked around and said, where is it? It's kind of all underground and stuff. So we decided what we'd do to bring it out is we'd find a reparative therapist and we'd sue him. And we would make this a visible issue. So we looked around, we found somebody, and we were going to go ahead, and we had someone, the national organization was going to take us on as a cause pro bono to do that work. And then myself and the other person, Lee Beckstead, who at the time we were working this through the Guild, we looked at each other, we said, one thing's missing, we're violating our ethical standards. That your ethical standards is you always talk to somebody before you're going to do something like that. So we decided we'd go talk to that person in person, and we sat down and we said, we're thinking about suing you for what you're doing. So we got a dialogue started, interestingly enough, about doing that. So we'd like to avoid doing that. And what grew out of that, the short version is, we decided that what we needed to do, I work a lot with dissociative issues with clients, the whole spectrum. So I work with a lot of clients who are at the extreme end of dissociation and actually have separated parts and alters. And it occurred to me that's Utah, the Valley, Provo, Ogden, Davis County, Salt Lake City. We're like a dissociative identity client. And we're all stuck in between these mountains. We have no choice. There's no big cities very close by. We're stuck with each other, and we're at war with each other. And the first thing you do with the DID client is you don't take sides. You get to know the parts, and you figure out how can we collaborate and come out and be holistic in some way. So we went out one by one and started meeting people, and we would sit down, have lunch, meet whatever, and so we want to have a gathering and bring as many of the parts together. And we're not going to change anybody, but let's see if we can get to know each other. But why do you exist? Why do I exist? Where are we? So we assembled 96 people, and we got together for 6 hours. We had a conference just getting to know each other. And it worked well enough that we said we promise we'll make sure this stays respectful the whole time. And we had that meeting, and it was so inspiring that we decided to pick 8 people across the spectrum. So pretty much 4 leaning on one side, 4 leaning on the others. We began to meet. That was 5.5 years ago. And we've been meeting now every month for 2 to 6 hours across the board. And decided we need to find some way, if we can resolve it, then we can make a difference in the community. And the one beef that I think probably all of us have with the bans that are being done is kind of twofold. One is that we're banning something, but we're not saying what we should be doing. And that's the problem with things that are legalistic and bans, is they say don't do it, but everything keeps popping out the other end, and then people find the cracks and just keep doing it a different way. So reparative therapy became sexual orientation change efforts, became conversion therapy, it just moves around. So what you're banning is like a moving target. And then we don't know what we're working with. So what if we take a different approach and say, what should we be doing? And what if we offer people skills about how to work with these complex issues integratively? And that's what's brought us together. We're now a group of 10. We've had some membership changes, but we've grown, and that's what we're doing. And we pretty quickly, totally by surprise, when we were having some tension between us and deciding, are we going to keep meeting? Is this really worth doing? We discovered that because of our clinical background, we all share 2 ethical standards in common, and that is do no harm and client self-determination. And that's become the cornerstone that we've then been able to build more and more. Okay, we get over here, we disagree, how do we do that? Staying within do no harm and self-determination. And we've now developed a 28-page, I guess it is, document that's on our website that gives principles and practices for integrating faith-based concerns and sexual and gender orientation.
Just so you see, so if there's anybody that's really, really interested in this, I have some hard copies of this. So this is the booklet that he's talking about. We published this last year. We will send out a link to the PDF of this to everybody. But if this is something that you really are interested in and want to have some specialty area, we're happy to give you a copy of this, so come talk to us afterwards.
So that's a living document that will probably always stay somewhat fluid and in motion, because the techniques and interventions and things may keep kind of altering some. Then we really put our sights to, can we talk about, do we have agreement on what we shouldn't do? So we've now got a no harms declaration that, interestingly, across the continuum with really different orientations and beliefs, we have come up with a do no harms declaration that defines here are the things. And we can talk some more about what stuff is included in that as we go through. But that's probably going to stay more in place, because those are just things that shouldn't be done, period. And that have been done, and it's some that still do exist in some fashion, some places. We want to do that. So that's kind of what we've been doing. What's also held us together, and it's on our website, is a peacemaking protocol.
Which is the best. Which is the absolute best.
And we've come up with kind of, which puts in motion what some of us, we realized we were doing somewhat naturally, intuitively in our group, and some of us have done it over the years. Part of my background before I got heavily into working with sexual assault was doing conflict mediation. And back in the 60s, when I was in college and the Vietnam War was going on and civil rights movement, I would get actively involved in bringing opponents together. We'd have public forums, like I'd bring VFW commanders and draft resistors together, or we had a week-long forum where everything that we had at the university where I was opposites being in the same room having respectful dialogue. So we'd do that. And some of the principles, so I was familiar myself from my experience, but probably an underlying principle that has worked for us that feeds, and I think it's just general good therapy as well, is collaboration. That you're seeking collaboration with your clients. We are seeking collaboration with us being different. And how do we find our authentic starting point so that we can collaborate? And then the other part is win-win problem solving. And what win-win problem solving has at its core is a belief that it's a possibility to not have a winner and a loser, And that compromise is not win-win. Compromise might be giving up or abandoning. But if you really hold your sides and can do it respectfully, you can come up with win-win solutions. And what that leads to as well is the idea of thinking beyond the bifurcation of it's either or, yours or mine. But you begin to look at, so this is yours, this is mine, what's the third and fourth and fifth option? And from that you begin to build win-win problem solving. So that's been what's held us together. And what's been interesting too, I'll just say this kind of by the last part, we've faced numbers of times when we always blew apart. And we've always been able with these principles and the peacemaking to come back together. An example being, it's kind of it's public. An example one, there was a court case out in New Jersey of an agency that was doing reparative therapy. And so they got taken to court by Southern Poverty Law Center and some other people. And as part of that process, one of the things that got dragged into the court hearing was a protocol for doing some change-oriented retreat work. And the person who developed that protocol was part of our group. And the court brought in as an expert witness who helped to introduce stuff that helped to win the case as part of our group. So here we were in this situation doing that, and you can imagine how volatile that got for all the ripple effects of people that were involved. And we were able to hang together, work it through. We had some other meetings besides just us to work it out. But that's the case of doing this. It's not risk-free. It's not problem-free. It's not a straight line. But applying all these things, some things can really grow. So here we are today. We were here a couple of years ago actually doing a workshop on this topic at BYU, which is something I never would have imagined happening. And we've had people involved in this come to our guild and other places and do presentations where we never thought people would be in the same room together. So that's kind of who we are. And I think this has application beyond just this issue. What we're doing, but we're really invested in doing something with this issue because it's so up and running for us here in Utah. And then we begin to see where we fit into the bigger world. And part of the things we're talking about is if we can broker some of these kind of agreements and change how therapy and things works in Utah, the rest of the states are looking at us. And that's going to have a real ripple effect to do it. So that's why it's helpful just to be right in the middle of where we are and not flee, run away, because we're going to have a big, big difference. We already are with the things that we're doing. So I think it kind of just gives the overview. And we have fun, too. We've all grown to really like each other and have fun. And that's really nice to have people, we might not have otherwise met each other. And it's a real different model than back when we get into a room, we stand up and fight and scream and yell, and then shake hands and go away. We're actually building some relationships. So.
Can I say one thing?
Yes.
I assign materials in my classes, in both my undergraduate class, so the best materials, the guidelines for how to form public policy are revolutionary. But more than that, it's the way that they treat each other that's been so inspiring to me. And I have on more than one occasion thought, and this is the truth, I thought, what would one of them do if they were here right now? How would I say that differently? And it's this idea of respect and the belief that we don't have to have divisive dialogue that informs me and has stuck with me over the 4 years. There's something very authentic about the way they do it that is more than what's on paper. It's the humanity of it. Although I use all the stuff that's on paper and I really recommend it. I can't speak highly enough of what they do and how they do it.
Yeah, again, weaving social justice with, I think you have to be the therapist that you want your kind of clients' lives to be like, and it can't just be going in and giving techniques and interventions that our clients energetically don't get the inspiration for it to hold. And I don't mean propagandizing people, I just mean in terms of genuine kind of human values. If we can be those and live those, it really makes a difference with our clients.
I would add too, and Jim, if you would, I'm going to ask each of you to say something about this, but part of the work, I mean, there's a work of collaborating and coming together to find common ground or to find shared values, but that's a mutually informing process. You can't engage in something like that without being changed yourself? And if I could invite each of you, and then I'll say something as well, but how would you say the work of the last 5 years has changed you and how you approach these issues? And then Jerry, Lisa, Emma.
Well, I guess all I can say about that is it's let me say this succinctly. I didn't think that I would be pulled as much to stay and keep working this out here in Utah. I guess the way it's changed me is I keep digging in deeper and deeper. This is where I'm going to stay. This is what I'm going to keep doing the work and to do it. So I think I was probably more superficial. I was here to ski, or I was here to do the snow runs out. I won't do it. And now like I'm really, really committed to that this is my place. And probably I've taken ownership over, you can't make me leave. I'm going to keep staying to do this. So it's kind of at that level. And I really see some of the microaggressions that happen across the lines from the affirmative community towards the dominant culture as well. So it's not just what I was seeing in terms of what comes my direction, but also really being able to work with my own camps around the microaggressions or the active things that we might do as well. I have a responsibility to not be afraid to challenge my own kind, as well as being a rebel against the others.
I don't know that my approach necessarily with clients has changed a lot in terms of, I've always kind of believed in this concept of self-determination and have been working with clients with the template that we're going to show you here throughout my career. But I do think as a social worker, I feel like what I do clinically is a piece of what I do. And as a social worker, I've taken on interesting this role of advocate for, like at the University of Utah in the School of Social Work, things tend to always take a very liberal bent. And so I feel like I've through this group process, I feel much more empowered to try to bring all voices to the table so that more conservative voices are represented in the social justice dialogues, and in particular in this discussion. I think sometimes in the social justice venue, we become obsessed, and I think correctly so, for civil rights with LGBT folks. But I think what's happened therapeutically is it's kind of clouded over our ability to really work where clients are at. And so if I have a client who's privileging their religious identity, right, I have a responsibility to assist that client in getting what they want out of their experience. I think sometimes in our training programs and maybe therapists, they get a little zealous about, well, this is what it should look like for you. And so I feel like I've been able to help moderate that voice.
I think participating in the group has been one of the primary ways I have seen that other people are affected by assumptions that I make that I didn't know I was making. That is that the things that I'm blind to, that I might just move into and speak about as though they were universal things that are understood, I recognize that they cause harm to people, and not just theoretically, but really. I have been able to see real people reacting to events in real time. The Josh Weed story that perhaps you are aware of what happened there. To see how I see how it affected my clients and what was going on with them, but I also, in this group, got to see how it affected others who might not be at my clinic, who were having real reactions that were meaningful that I might have missed. Being able to expand from beyond what I thought was a growing place and grow even more in dialogue with people who come from things in different ways from very helpful.
And to add some personal thoughts from my perspective, I think for a long time I've been a fan of Jonathan Haidt's work. If any of you are familiar with him, He's done a lot of work talking about how any kind of the lack of diversity in academia is harming. The lack of ideological diversity in research harms research. The lack of ideological diversity in academia is harming us. And so he's very much a proponent of bringing together people from different perspectives to these collaborative kinds of efforts, and he has what's called the Heterodox Academy. And for me, hearing, there have been times where I've listened to one of these members of the group, or Jerry or Jim or Lisa, say something where every single one of us have blind spots. You can't get through life without having blind spots. And it was Aristotle who said the unexamined life is not worth living. There's something about, I have a friend who said, she's like, I was sitting in a meeting where someone said, we need to be careful not to be disillusioned, right, about certain things. And she said, I think of disillusionment as a good thing, right? I don't want to live a life based on illusions. I want to be disillusioned. And there being a part of the group and to hear different perspectives and to see, each of the members of the group, the very personal aspect as much as the conceptual aspect, have challenged me and disillusioned me and challenged blind spots and have made me a better person, certainly, but more importantly, a better therapist in this context. And so any opportunity that you have to engage in sort of this ideologically diverse or collaborative enterprises, I would encourage you to do so. The next piece of this is going to be Jerry, who's going to introduce you to one side of the document that you have. So on one side is the No Harms Declaration. Lisa's going to lead us through that. Jerry is going to guide us through the abbreviated guide. So what this one-page summary that you're looking at is a one-page summary of the booklet.
So I probably should give you a warning. That's called trigger warnings, right? Because I'm from Detroit, I'm Sicilian, and I'm a social worker. And a gay activist. So put your seatbelts on. I'm curious. We were just kind of talking up here. It feels like we're doing a lot of talking and trying to educate, because we've been spending 6 years on this, and somebody wants to listen to us. But I'm curious how many of you have already read the Resolving Distress Between Faith-Based, the 10 points. How many of you have already looked at it just sitting here? Oh, just like the University of Utah, no one. Ty is working magic here on the PowerPoint. So I'm going to try to go through these points fairly quickly. But I hope if it triggers a thought or a question that you speak up so that we can kind of talk about this. It's really fairly easy to read unless you're a student. Then it's impossible if you have everything to do. All right, so in the absence of the PowerPoint, if you just look at the handout, and I'm not going to wear my glasses, so Sammy, because I know your name. No.
Hey, Jared, do you want to double check and see make sure it's
Oh boy, she just lucked out, didn't she? Oh, okay. So I guess we can start here. Sammy, sorry.
That's fine.
So you heard Ty talk about our manual, and then you've got our this thing over here. Does this have a pointer? Okay. And then this is our website reconciliationgrowth.org. And you'll see the peacemaking protocols on there. The full PDF document is on there. Our Do No Harms document. It's a valuable resource. I use it with my students too. It's part of my curriculum. And there's a bigger picture of the Facebook page. We do have a Facebook page as well. Why does this keep showing up? Okay. So this is, we actually created kind of a consolidated list because a lot of people aren't reading like the full 28 pages. But we kind of felt like this is like the philosophy that guides us. So Sammy, can you read this? Which is the first paragraph on here.
Mental health providers, communities, policymakers, Churches and families can provide better support and avoid harm by following these key ethical principles. We advocate moving beyond terminology such as reparative, conversion, sexual orientation change efforts, and affirmative therapies because they fuel adversarial tensions and foster misunderstanding. Instead, we favor language that focuses on reducing the distress associated with same-sex attractions and non-traditional gender.
Yeah. So I think you heard Jim talk a little bit about kind of the catalyst that got us started. And definitely there were camps, certainly here in Utah, but I think even nationally, of reparative therapists. It's interesting, I kept being called an affirmative therapist, and I just thought I was a clinical social worker. But because I represented an agency or an organization that wanted to provide kind of pro-LGBT services, kind of get put into these different camps. And what that does is it's divided us as a community. And I think when we had our first ethics conference that Jim was talking about, was the first attempt, at least in 15 years, from a particular event that happened at the University of Utah, where people came into the same room and had a discussion. And ultimately in that discussion, we realized we shared a lot in common. So these are the 10 principles, okay? This first one, assessment and intervention should adhere to the 2 core principles of do no harm and facilitate self-determination. Any thoughts about that? Does that seem pretty obvious? It's interesting, the concept of self-determination, though, gets lost a lot. And I know we've talked a lot about what it means to be LDS working with this population, but I would suggest that a lot of queer or LGBT therapists do the same thing, where they privilege sexual identity over religious identity or spiritual identifications. And so that same dynamic can play out, and we all think we're doing the right thing, but ultimately we want to support clients' ability to sort out ultimately what's in their own best interest. Number 2, it's important that we have an appreciation for and understanding of individuals who experience non-traditional gender, attractions to same sex, or both. And then the counter to that is exercise respect for and understanding of the religious, spiritual, cultural, and other ideological values of individuals and communities. So we have to understand and respect both positions. I'll give you an example on this third one. I've done a lot of correctional social work in my career. And I had an individual who's about 63 years old who was convicted of a sex offense, who was at a halfway house. And part of this guy's dynamics was his own conflict around his sexual identity. His therapist prohibited him from going to church. He identified as LDS. That was kind of the entire bulk of his existence, was around his religious identity. But she had decided that it was not in his interest in understanding his sexual orientation to participate in his church services. So it's an example of a therapist who maybe was not respecting his religious identity and perhaps overtly privileging sexual identity. It's interesting, when he came to my office, I immediately tried to figure out how to advocate for him to be able to safely go to church. And it took a lot of convincing. The therapist and the treatment program involved just could not budge from that mentality. 4, it's important that we have an appreciation for and understanding of sexuality, gender, and ideological values as a spectrum of diverse identities. Now, what does that mean?
One shoe does not fit all.
One shoe, can you elaborate?
I don't know if I can elaborate.
2 shoes do not fit all.
Now we're talking about shoes.
This is going to sound really trite, but so I've really developed this great affection for Queer Eye on TV. So I love these guys and what they do. I just love them. But what was really interesting to me in one of the most recent episodes, the individual that they were helping was transgender, and one of the gay men was very open about saying, I have no idea about the transgender community. I am completely ignorant, and I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed that as an an active LDS man, I have no idea about the transgender community. So I just think this idea that you can lump you can't lump all LDS people into one. You can't lump any group into one very small box.
Well, I assume we have a few LDS people in here, right? And my assumption is because you're all LDS, you all look at the Sabbath day as exactly the same thing, right? You do it exactly the same way. Is that right?
No.
Yeah, so there's a spectrum of identities, right, in terms of how we relate to things. And so I could have a room of 5 gay men, 5 lesbians, whatever. We would all have a different relationship to the spectrum of how we identify and what that looks like for us. And even in terms of levels of attractions to partners or what that looks like for us. And so I think it's just allowing for the diversity of experience. Number 5, it's important that we utilize approaches that are respectful and compassionate to all lived realities on all points of the spectrum without dismissing any. Yes, ma'am.
I had a conversation with a friend a couple days ago, actually, and he is gay and LDS, and he said that the hardest part is feeling like everywhere he goes, he doesn't fit, right? And he is with his gay friends, and they say, how could you be Mormon? How could you do that? That's like, it's hurting you. Why are you doing that? He's with his LDS friends, and they say, like, how can you be a part of the gay community? Like, what are you doing? And so I think that's why it's so important as therapists to, like, just, like, affirm all parts of them, because in these two communities, they still, you know, if they're kind of balancing between these two parts themselves, like, they get a lot of, you know, that you're wrong because you're with this group, or you're wrong because of that. So I think this therapy should be a place that we can kind of help them navigate both of those parts of themselves and hold them together. Right,
which is when you were mentioning, I think it was you was mentioning out and healthy, no, what was that discussion? Okay, but we were having that discussion, because I know in my mind I was thinking, well, there's lots of, you know, health looks different for a lot of, harm looks different, you know. And so how do we sit with our clients and kind of listen and digest their stories and embrace how they're relating to the world? And so it is interesting how many active LDS, LGBT people, you know, those people, have a difficult time finding a place where they can be heard. The last place they need to have that struggle is in our offices, right? But the only way, I think, the only way that we're going to get there as therapists is to kind of expose ourselves to that spectrum. And I think, you know, it's interesting, this conversation about searching for the perfect LDS therapist, right? It's like, to me, that's interesting. It feels like kind of an insulated approach to trying to find somebody who thinks just like me, as opposed to what happens when we really celebrate and embrace diversity. I know myself as a father of a daughter who's active LDS, I have to do this. Like, how can you do this? Right? If I make it personal, I can run into problems. If I can sit in her shoes, right, I can see it differently. 6, individuals may experience distress related to same-sex attractions and or gender identity. However, a person is not mentally ill, developmentally delayed, or addicted simply because they have experienced same-sex attractions or non-traditional gender.
What do you do with a client who comes in with that narrative? I am a sex addict, and it's really an LGBT spectrum issue.
Yeah. So just to kind of back up, there's reasons why this is here, and it's relevant, right? Lisa kind of alluded in our own mental health history, right? It's not that long ago that homosexuality was still included in the DSM, right? And frankly, this is my view looking in, right? But often when I've heard general authorities talk about queer identities, it's in the realm of there's a problem. it's immoral, or it's an addiction. And so we've been socialized and cultured to look at it through that lens. And even internalized homophobia within our own community is very real, where we even see ourselves in that way. And so I think when a client comes in, I'm curious about where they reach that conclusion. And I might examine, I just may ask the questions, if we could let go of that story of being addicted, if we could change that story, what would it look differently? How would that look? And just begin to, from a strength-based perspective, help them start to conceptualize what the alternative could be. But I think we have to be aware that even in our mental health community now, there's people who adhere to this pretty strongly. Do you see a hand?
Yeah, so I'm currently working on a research paper with a professor that has two variables, the LDS variable, you know, if you attend church or active, and mental health variables. And in this paper, he has listed all these mental health variables, and LGBTQ is included in there. And I thought to myself, is that offensive? You know, if someone were to read that, and it's included in a group of, you know, depression and bipolar disorder, you know, and then LGBTQ. I don't know. I thought, like, gosh, I don't know how I feel about that. So maybe that's obviously a conversation I need to have with him, but what would be a better way of still addressing, because, you know, there's some positive outcomes to being religious and being LDS, and unfortunately there's some negative outcomes with people who are struggling with their faith and sexual identity. So it's important to include that in the paper, I think, but what's a good way of presenting that, you know, and maybe that's not a good thing to talk about right now, but just something I've been thinking about.
But I think what you do point to is we've looked at homosexuality through the lens of only being a behavior. Mm-hmm. And we haven't had much history of really embracing the idea of identity that includes spirituality, that includes social, emotional context. Right? And so, you know, part of it might be your professor's just old. And kind of been old narratives.
Yeah, I mean, and he's a great person, but I just, and I don't think that he meant to do that, but I just, you know, I've been thinking about it a lot and wondering how can we include these important things in this paper.
Yeah. So thank goodness we have people with the courage to speak up and say, is this a bias that's being embedded in your research?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And do we want to look at this differently?
Right.
One of the things that you might want to do, because we've had this discussion in our group, it's beginning to take this statement and put all the emphasis, capital letter, underline, on distress, not attraction and identity.
Sure.
So when you have distress, that's a mental health concern. But it's not the attraction, it's not the identity.
Oh, okay.
And if you're living in a world that pathologizes, excludes, whatever, you probably have distress. But you don't blame the client.
Right, and I think that's honestly what he's trying to capitalize on.
That's
that
the
some
worry.
people read it, yeah.
And if you focus on your identity or attraction rather than saying, are you having distress because of?
Mm-hmm. So that's, yeah, very good. Thank you.
Okay. Number 7, all sexual orientations, gender identities, and religious, spiritual, and other ideological values have the potential to be lived in healthy and unhealthy ways. Is there any fault in that? You're all thinking about your parents, I know. The focus should be on improving functioning and changing unhealthy expressions. Right? And so, again, it goes back to this discussion, well, how do we define healthy and unhealthy? You know, so I think this becomes a very powerful tool, the 7th one, right? Yeah. And Lisa's going to talk more specifically about this, but approaches are inherently harmful if they foster expectations of a specific sexual orientation or gender identity outcome. If I'm sitting down and I've already decided what the treatment plan is before I know your story, and we're going to fix this, right? We've started out in a bad place. Use direct or indirect coercion. Well, does your bishop know about this? Would that be a form of coercion? It wasn't my case. No. And 3, base interventions on bias, unfounded theories, or prejudice. Okay. And what's interesting as we've kind of unfolded this process over the 6 years, and I think if some of these people were here, they would say this. It was interesting when my partner and I got married. I invited everyone from our group to participate, and some of them were on the more conservative edge of things. And I had a very colorful wedding. I mean, I've been involved in my community for a long time and have a pretty eclectic set of friends in our lives. But it was interesting, him even came back from the wedding and said, wow, I've never seen like healthy gay and lesbian people. Right? And so here they had kind of been approaching therapy from a particular paradigm in the absence of maybe being around people who have a little bit more balance in their lives. So we don't want to base our interventions on bias or unfounded theories. And yes?
I think this can also be interesting. I work with a lot of bisexual clients in the process of doing therapy. They'll get to that stage where they're like, I'm ready to come out to my parents, and I work here at UAU. And it's fascinating because along those same lines, it almost becomes this test of what people's values, because as soon as they come out as bisexual, like parents will be like, well, that's fine. Just choose this side of the spectrum, as if it's 50-50.
Yeah.
That's what bisexuality means.
Or 60-40. You have options.
Yeah, exactly. And so all their friends and families are like, that's still okay. You just need to choose the right side.
Right.
And so it's just interesting because then they'll often, as a therapist, you have to really be there for them because they'll come back and they'll be hitting this very strongly with their family and friends.
Yeah. Yeah. And often that bisexual identity has the same struggles as a lot of transgender folks, that even within the queer community, it's a little fuzzy about their acceptance. It's like, well, they're still holding on to some of that heterosexual privilege kind of mentality.
So my question's kind of off of that, just kind of me thinking of when I've worked with different clients and the best way to help is where I have clients where, say maybe there is bisexuality, right? Which that makes it a little, in some ways, murkier, right? Because it's like, okay, here we can go one way or the other. And where they're wanting, I know it's not related to this. I'll throw it out there, and if you don't, just dismiss it. But it's like they want to stay active in the church, and they want to have a family along the, say, your traditional way, and navigating how to help them. I mean, it's still that self-determination in which ways to go, but sometimes as a therapist, you do push. It's like, well, if this is what you want, here are some things that might help. Or if you want this, here are some things that help, but making sure you're not pushing, because I try not to, but it's, I don't know if that would be a question I have. It could be later. Or,
I forget which one it is up here. We already looked at it. Well, basically, if you go to client self-determination, it's interesting that sometimes we tend to look at things as two choices. What happens when we facilitate people's ability to individualize even their spirituality? Right? There's the institutional force of religion, and then there's this thing of spirituality. And I have found in working with clients is to just kind of listen to what would be ideal. How would this work for you in a way that calms your soul, if you will? Right? And so that may not, it's like saying, well, if you come out as gay, you have to wear gold lame shorts and wave a rainbow flag. Right? Well, that's not for everyone either. Sometimes denim is nice. So, so I think when we talk about mobilizing client self-determination, right, we kind of help people to explore outside of some pretty rigid societal constructs we've created around sexual identity, gender identity, and religious identity even. It may not be what we would choose for ourselves, but it may be ideal for the client.
Sure. One more clarification. Maybe it helps too to think about bisexual is a sexual orientation. It's not a change station. It's not a midway point. Make up your mind, become one or the other. Bisexuality is an authentic sexual orientation.
well, I guess where I was thinking about it would be, say, typically if, say, they want to be a monogamous person, so whether you're bisexual or not, I mean, you're probably either going to pick someone that's then, well, I'm not perfect at this, female or male, or I guess transgender, but transgender, I guess they're
gender fluid, you're good.
Yeah. So, but at that point, like they pick one, I guess that's where maybe it gets confusing for me in that setting. But recognizing, yeah, bisexual's there, it's not like it's just going to disappear.
But if you pick one, you have to pick one, it doesn't make you straight or gay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, hopefully this doesn't throw a wrench in it. But, I work with a lot of clients that have OCD. And one of the common OCDs around here especially is like a homophobia OCD. And so I get caught in this because I don't, when they express doubt about their sexual orientation, the OCD treatment person says, oh, if I engage in this, that's reassurance seeking, that's like engaging with the compulsion. But then the other part of me says, but they have a right to kind of explore this and go through this. So I guess I'm just caught in this scenario because does that make sense? I don't know if it makes sense. Do I go with what their norm was before or
I'm a little confused.
So when you say your client has perfectionist homophobia and they want to talk about it, they want to talk about what?
So they have obsessions that they think they're gay.
Okay.
But they don't want to be gay, but they think they might be gay. And sometimes they might have actual attraction, sometimes they might not have attraction. But
and you're concerned that if you tell them you're probably not gay, is that what
well,
you're
I'm just concerned that if I engage in the conversation about whether they're gay or not, that's reassurance seeking. That's the very compulsion that we deal with OCD. So if I even engage in the conversation,
You're not treating OCD.
right?
Right. So by treating the OCD, he has to block out the homosexuality part, but by treating the homosexuality and seeking and filling out, he's not treating OCD.
Well, if homosexuality were a pathology, that would make a lot more sense to just say.
Well, I mean, I'm worried about his distress more than.
Right.
I'm worried more about his distress than I don't care what his sexual orientation is.
But he does.
But he does.
Mm-hmm.
And he keeps wanting to pull me into a discussion that sounds like a great discussion to have. It help him explore his sexuality and those types of things, but it may be harmful.
In his case, it may be more important that it doesn't matter to you.
What was your thought?
Well, my thought is one of the great things about it being a diverse pool, especially with OCD, is that they be very black and white. So if you ever look at a girl, you must be gay. Well, in my case, if you're straight. So, but and so I like some of the other models that they have around sexuality that it points out to different aspects of being attracted to humanness. And so one of my favorite ones breaks it down into several different areas, like aesthetically beautiful as opposed to erotically beautiful or romantically attracted versus, I always forget the other one, socially attracted. And I'll sit there with them so they can say like, here, let me show you mine. I'll show you what I am. And I aesthetically think women are gorgeous. I love painting women. I love seeing women. They're beautiful. Erotically, I feel nothing. It's not nothing there.
I
It's not my
guess
thing.
my concern is.
Yeah, but when they do that, they sit there and go, okay, well, I have this and this and this. And it's like, well, then what that make you? And then you're sitting there going like, well, I don't know. That's a mix of everything. It's like, well, there you go. You don't know. It's okay.
I guess the hard part that I'm seeing out of this.
Should I go there or not?
Huh?
Should I go there or not?
Is because if I go there, that might be like, sure, it's going to lower their anxiety in that moment, but it's going to lower it in the pattern of OCD, and that reassurance, which is kind of exploring both sides ad nauseum, going back and forth, is the very thing that they're using as a compulsion. Like, instead of washing hands, this is what they're doing.
Right.
They're going back and forth.
I can't help but to wonder if, I think sometimes it gets really convenient for us to kind of compartmentalize people around diagnosis. And that sometimes dictates our interaction with clients. And I wonder if that's always in the best interest of clients. And I wonder, what if you went there with them? What if you just explored what was happening? Is that irreparable?
Well, I mean, it's not irreparable, but it ends up fruitless.
Well, but it's fruitless if the topic keeps coming up, right? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Well, yeah, I guess what I'm saying is, I mean, the thing about OCD that's different from other diagnoses is that talk therapy is contraindicated.
But just pretend he doesn't have OCD for 1 week and see what happens. Just pretend. Just to forget OCD for a second and do what Jerry's saying for 1 week and see what happens.
I'll just make an observation. I've seen a lot of clients come into my office who have kind of historically been at other places, and they get lots of interesting diagnoses. And part of it is the client has never really been able to say, I think I'm gay, or I want to be able to talk about this. And so in the absence of it, I even think people who kind of maintain a closet kind of disposition for, right, emotionally they get disconnected, right? And they may have flat affect. They may have a very difficult time bringing kind of body and soul together. And so I think people get misdiagnosed, and what we see is more symptom. And so I wonder if you pretended like he wasn't
Well, I guess
OCD.
the reason that a lot of times, most of the clients that we receive that we get at our OCD specialist clinic are there because they've done exactly that for session after session after session after session, and it hasn't helped.
Right.
And so, does that make sense? I mean, I can pretend like that, but that's what they got.
I think you're answering your own question. If it really is confirmedly not anything to do with the possibility of being gay, it's not an issue. It's the OCD. Things that we would be concerned about in here is unexplored, people who haven't had a chance to explore. And if they're coming in presenting with something else, and most of us have experienced that, somebody comes in with depression, anxiety, various kinds of things, and what's really at the heart of it is distress or untreated trauma, stigma, and that's, I think, what Jerry's addressing.
Yeah. Jim?
Especially for males, that description with the OCD sounds like untreated trauma. So always, always, always get into the narrative. There's a high likelihood, especially with males, that that's untreated sexual trauma.
Okay. Thank you.
One thought, can I share that real quick? Kind of like with this discussion, the question that's been popping up in my head is, are we treating symptoms, or are we actually finding out what the root cause is? And when you're saying the trauma thing, like that could be a root cause. So is OCD the root cause, or is there an underlying issue that is a symptom of OCD? Does that make sense?
That's your job as a therapist.
Did you want to say something?
It's not on this, it's kind of going to this and the last point on the 8 one.
Okay, go ahead.
So if we want to read this first.
Okay, so I'll read this first, then we'll cue you to speak. Okay. Number 9, it's essential to provide a safe environment for individuals to explore, define, and articulate their own identity in order for each to discover their authentic self. And then?
So, with like mixed orientation marriages, what is the role of helping them explore their identity? Does that make sense? Like when let's say the husband is has same-sex attraction and is wanting to explore that more, but is still like debating about staying in the marriage or not. Like, how do you navigate that?
Can I ask what your concern would be? And so if I'm married and I say, gee, I want to talk more about what it means to be potentially gay, right? If I'm asking you to help me explore that, what's your concern?
So like the wife, like my client is the relationship, the couple. And so then the wife is like, I don't want you to explore your sexuality. I feel like if you go and like try being gay for a while, or like having a relationship with a man that's like cheating on me, or then like how do you support them, like the same-sex attracted client, while also supporting the relationship and
because you're an MS.
Yeah.
I'm just curious how you guys would respond to that. So if I understand correctly, I'm working with a couple. The male's identifying as having a desire to explore who am I potentially as a gay man.
Yeah.
Wife is feeling threatened by that.
Yeah.
What would be my next step? That's kind of your question, right?
Kind of simple. The hardest thing for me to confront as a beginning therapist is to the fact that somebody may get divorced while working with them, or self-harm, or indulge in serious substance abuse, and I wasn't helpful. So both of them have potential potential and be a lot of pain there that they're going to experience on a daily basis, whether you explore them with them or not. And you exploring it with them in a safe environment is the most therapeutic thing you can do. And say, look, wife, I know this is really hard, but he's experiencing this on a daily basis anyway, so let's try to talk about it. That might help. And then they might get divorced on your watch, and that's something most beginning therapists are terrified about. That's okay.
Not to be so fatalistic, or they may realize maybe there's something we can do with this relationship. It's the fear of exploring something, right? And so I think I would certainly start with trying to deconstruct, okay, what's happening for both of you. Maybe he doesn't realize how that could impact her.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what she's afraid of, them solving it and resolving it.
I guess like more of my question is like, what in like that case, like how do you encourage exploration? Like what does that type of exploration look like? Does that make sense?
Yes, I'll get to this in a minute, but I think it has to. I think it has to be individualistic. It has to be who are the clients you're working with, and what's being stated. Because what I think is exploring may be very different than what my client might be thinking.
And what their marriage is okay with, and
and you know, where's the boundaries in this relationship, and how does that work?
And that's the fear that keeps people from talking about it and from doing the first steps on knowing themselves. And you can help address that fear by saying, I'm not afraid for us to start talking about it and talk about what exploring it might mean.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think is tricky is if they're beginning with the assumption that exploring it means I need to go have sex with people, or as opposed to just talking about what this might mean or what kind, what is this attraction, what is it about. I think there was a reference back here. So one of our colleagues in the group, Lee Beckstead, he developed this sort of framework of different domains of attraction and aversion. And I have clients who are really high in erotic for the same sex, but in romantic, there's a kind of aversion. So there are people that might be all over, and I'll often have people kind of just conceptually, subjectively map where they're at in a given moment, and often it's really enlightening for them to think of, because we think Kinsey scale. Even when we talk about this in this exploration, we often kind of conflate attraction with identity, right? I feel, therefore I am, and that's our culture, right? But to be able to tease those out and to talk about attractions as separate from identity or the narratives through which we interpret what we're feeling and how we incorporate that into a sense of self, this is all part of a much more sophisticated way of looking at this with clients. And to be able to unpack this with clients and to explore possibilities of just dialoguing around it, or reassuring. Sometimes the client is, the spouse is, her biggest question is, am I safe in this relationship? And that's not really the question that we're answering. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so there's so many different ways to unpack it. We have to think, layers deeper than what I think we're typically equipped.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is we are socialized again to look at sexual orientation as only a set of behaviors, and we tend to do that more with gay than straight, right? But so when someone says I'm out to explore, we immediately register they want to go out and have sex versus, wow, what does that look like just to have a gay friend or someone to go bowling with, or just I have a couple of friends I work out with who are very happy in their lives. But I think it's just kind of having that camaraderie that maybe I'm understood at a little different level. That might be enough exploration to just be okay.
Yeah.
So we got to let go of our bias about what some of that means.
One of the best things this group taught me about self-determination is to believe in people, that they can have conversations to figure out their own path. And because I open the gate to a conversation in therapy that's potentially frightening to me, doesn't mean that I'm going to influence the clients to be brainwashed to do something I want them to do. They can really determine in healthy ways how they want to live their lives. And that's something I learned in this group 4 or 5 years ago. I thought, I'm not believing in their ability to make self-determined choices about their lives. And that freaked me out to have conversations I was afraid of before.
And then this last one is just simply saying that individuals and institutions that have privilege, social privilege and power, have a responsibility to avoid demanding specific types or outcomes of identity change, and instead encourage mental and physical health. So not only do we as individual therapists, but even the institutions that we're involved in, I think we have some responsibility. So these are, yep, that's it. So I'm going to turn this over to you. To do no harm.
We'll see how it goes. So as we talked about these principles, I hope in your mind, and I heard you talk about them, you're thinking of ways that a therapist can cause harm to a client. Yes. And wait again. So think, what ways can a therapist cause harm to a client? Along some of these principles we've just been talking about. Yes.
I think some of those microaggressions that communicate that choosing one way or the other is not acceptable to the therapist.
Yeah, that would be really hard for a therapist. It could hurt a client. Or I'm afraid to explore what this might mean to you because it might make you do some behaviors I don't want you to do. Great. Yes?
Making assumptions about their experience and then just running with that.
Okay. For example, if somebody's identified as gay for 2 or 3 years, so how many people have you had sex with?
Mm-hmm. And assuming that like being gay looks the same for the people, or that being LDS and gay might look the same for someone versus another client.
Mm-hmm. Making an assumption that if someone is LDS and gay, that they're going to leave the church.
Yeah.
Or make certain choices. Or marry a woman. Great. More. Yes.
I think a lot of times in therapy, clients are like sharing things for the first time with someone, and so just being aware of like our nonverbal behaviors and our body language and how we're communicating.
Yep.
If we say something that maybe makes us feel uncomfortable for whatever reason, an issue that we haven't worked out ourselves, just being really respectful and compassionate towards them, because this is sometimes the first time sharing their experience with someone else.
Yes. So what's an example of a response that might be harmful?
So if a client were to say maybe they engage in some behavior that we didn't agree with and having a facial expression, it's like, oh, you did what? I mean, that's not safe for them, and they're not going to want to share their experience with anyone else.
So being able to curb your own surprised or startled reaction by something, being more neutral. Great. Others, yeah?
I think context matters a lot as well. And what I mean by that, like I've had clients just talk to me about therapists they've gone to see. Just for them personally, having a Book of Mormon in the waiting room was something that they really did not like, really turned them off, and they perceived as harmful. Or an LDS church-related magazine.
And see if you can put words to what that might have broached for the client.
It immediately, for them, it's kind of that right to self-determination. They come in, they see that, and they're like, I'm already kind of prepping myself to defend myself, feeling like there's going to be an agenda, is probably the easiest way to say it, that the therapist is going to hold. Now, they might be making that rightfully or wrongfully, but from their point of view, they found it harmful.
So for them it's harmful if they believe you have a path for them. Great. Others. Yes.
I think it's harmful when you might want to keep the client, but you really know that it's becoming outside of your scope of practice, or it'd be a better fit with a different therapist, and you're not willing to have that conversation.
Great. If you go home and say to yourself, oh my gosh, I started telling that client what to do based on something inside of me, and I really have no idea. I better go get some supervision or talk with someone and see if I can change course on this, or if I know enough, or if I have to do a referral. Excellent. Others? Yes?
This is one that's pretty common when I was teaching in Indiana, is that they would find out somebody's sexual orientation and they would just transfer.
Where was this in Indiana? That's where I grew up.
I didn't hear that.
In Indiana? See?
We can't
They would transfer them. They would say, oh, I don't want to deal with an LGBT population, and so I'm going to just transfer them to another place.
And what they usually say is, not that I don't want it, but it's outside my scope of competence, right? So I'm going to transfer them to someone else. And whereas we recognize that there are some specific competencies in working with an LGBT population, in many respects, it's like, I don't want to work with people of this race or this ethnicity. We're talking about people, not a diagnostic specialty.
Well, and I was working in rural Indiana, Richmond area.
Richmond? Is that in Indianapolis, North State or South State?
I don't know.
Oh,
I said that once.
Muncie?
Yeah. Anyway, but
Muncie was not a state when I was there. Okay.
But my point is, I would always tell them, like, who are you going to transfer them to? Because there isn't anybody in that rural community that is a specialist.
That's especially
that is a
egregious.
specialist in this.
But it might
So
be
it was
egregious
kind of-
even in a place with lots of therapists.
And they were using it as an excuse to not learn about that.
I'm glad you pointed that out. That's tremendously harmful. Amanda?
Yeah, I guess just a little bit more, like, I think, and I was thinking about this when we were talking about our statements, we feel like for myself, I felt very supportive, very comfortable working with LGBT, I thought, and then you will sometimes find kind of an intersection where all of a sudden you're not comfortable. For example, I had a transgender client who transitioned while I was seeing him. And he didn't come at first for that, but it happened very fast. And really loved him, felt comfortable up until a point when he wanted me to involve the kids and explain it and normalize it and help them understand. And then I just felt like I am not going to be the best therapist for you, and I want you, if you want that, then that's going to be outside my scope of practice. I've never done that. And it's starting to conflict with where I.
So what's your responsibility at that point?
My responsibility is to find an appropriate, to bring it up, to see how he feels about it, and then to pursue a referral if he wanted to, which is what happened.
And
it was a good discussion.
That's great. And I would propose that before that referral happens, you talk with that other person about what training you would need to do for this to be your opportunity to bump it up.
Right.
And of course, that's what we all learn in school is when you get a client that you don't know, you pull out the books and you talk to people who have done it and you look up treatment plans. And that is often your very best opportunity to watch a session, do a joint session, figure out how to do this thing that is for a client that you might be working with. Yeah, absolutely. And if it's not something you can do, sit in, watch. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Maybe just a couple more, and then I want to show you the document. But yes.
I think you started to make an important point a moment ago, and that is that just because someone has a non-traditional gender identity or and we're in the spectrum, does not mean that what you're working on is that focus. Like, they're just people. And that's been, so far my experience. I haven't really worked on that issue specifically. I want to learn more about it. But the people I've worked with who have, aren't heterosexual or have, the identity differences, that has to do what they came for. And their relationship, for example, talking about a relationship with another person, it's about the relationship. It's not about that.
Excellent. Yeah, and that can cause harm if you as a therapist come back to that issue as the source or the root or it was relevant to the kinds of things that they're experiencing. They can start to think that you think it's a pathology. Yeah, exactly. Good. One more?
I think it becomes important to really find out where the couple, like if you have a couple like someone was talking about over here, where they're in a heterosexual relationship, but one in the partner would like to explore something more than that. Again, it's like, if they're in an open relationship, that's one thing. But if, like, for example, you're doing EFT and it's really, when you're working EFT, usually you want both parties to be committing to that relationship because you're not going to be vulnerable if you don't feel safe. So you're not going to be able to do couples counseling. So at that point, you might need to do some individual a little bit just to try to get a feel for, okay, are you willing to allow for not sexual exploration, but allowing this other partner of yours to explore their identity and see where that takes you. Does that mean that they'll be able to stay as a couple? Well, probably if one of them wants a monogamous and the other one doesn't, probably not. You know, again, it's allowing their values to determine the outcome, not our agenda of what we as therapists believe it should be. Mm-hmm. We have to give them the space to really
to not repress something so much that we know it's going to come back around and bite them because they didn't get a chance to look at it or see how to involve it in their lives in a healthy way. And many people, and this was about a mixed orientation marriage, but many people who are in what they would call a mixed orientation marriage actually do benefit from exploring it and figuring out what parts of themselves they can share with this person and that person while still maintaining their values in the marriage. It may be more than just sexual activity. It may be a part of their whole being and the way they interact with people and the way they see the world and the way they want to talk about things or experience things. So, all right, here we go. Avoiding therapeutic harm. We advocate the following therapeutic principles when dealing with sexuality, gender, and faith. Let's start here with Brady.
Self-determination requires that mental health providers see each client as a multifaceted person and advocate for that individual's right to explore, define, and live out their own life path. It is important that we use approaches that are respectful and compassionate to all lived experiences regarding sexuality, gender, and faith.
Wonderful. And remind me your name again?
Bart.
Bart.
Do no harm. Do no harm means that mental health providers refrain from client-focused actions that impair an individual's intellectual, emotional, or psychological development.
Like shock therapy?
Convey to the individual that they are defective, unlovable, or of lesser value.
I had a client tell me that his past therapist said, "You don't want to be gay. What kind of a life will you have?"
Assert that individuals should meet the expectations of other persons, institutions, or customs.
What will it be like for you if you have to tell your bishop that you are going to date men? You know you want to tell your bishop good things. We'll go on to the next person. Ash?
Sure. Let's see, these interventions and approaches are harmful. Violating professional ethics.
We'll just call that one self-evident. Next. Go ahead.
Fostering expectations of a specific sexual orientation, gender identity, or faith outcome. Using direct or indirect manipulation, coercion, punishment, or aversion to achieve a specific sexual orientation, gender identity, or faith outcome.
And how many of you are familiar with the story of Alex from St. George? Not from St. George, who went to St. George. Okay. This was a big splash. It wasn't a therapy, thank goodness. But it was someone who worked at a residential treatment center who decided she understood how to use aversion and coercion that they used in residential treatment to achieve certain behaviors to change someone's sexual orientation. And so someone contacted her because they thought because she worked at this treatment center she would know what to do, and sent their daughter there to change her sexual orientation. And the methods that were employed were coercion, manipulation, punishment, and aversion. And they were notoriously unsuccessful. Okay, tell me your name.
Suzanne.
Suzanne, do you want to read the next three?
Sure. Using pharmacological interventions or shock therapies to achieve a specific sexual orientation or gender identity outcome. Urging the client to discard deeply held beliefs about religion, faith,
Good. No, I'm glad she's reading off the page because that's more updated than this probably.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't read.
Perfect. You're doing fine. You're inspired.
I'm a little blind for that.
Urging. Start with urging.
Urging the client to discard deeply held beliefs about religion, faith, sexuality, or gender identity. basing treatment on assumptions that every client's experience adheres to a one-size-fits-all model or theory.
Awesome. Amanda, you want to take the last one?
Basing treatment on assumptions that a person is necessarily mentally ill or exhibiting a learned reactive or addictive behavior because they experience sexual diversity, gender diversity, and or a deep devotion to faith.
Okay, this is one that we talked about just a little bit earlier, and we said we'd sort of come back to it. So it causes harm to base treatment on assumptions that if a person comes in, they are experiencing something like this. Even here at BYU, just a handful of decades ago, I hope it's been that long, if someone wanted therapy for same-sex attraction, they put them in a group that was called sex addiction. Because it was assumed that if you were interested in erotic feelings about someone of your same sex, that was because you were addicted to sex. And so it was a failure to understand the experience of what it's like to look at life from a different lens. We still have therapists here who believe that being gay is a construct, that it's been constructed in life, that people are born without a sexual orientation of any kind, and that it is life experience that actually constructs it. And so they think of therapy as a process of deconstructing that orientation. And you may hear them give presentations in your life, because they do give presentations here in Utah. Our group believes that starting from that assumption, that is the source of why a person coming in front of you is the way they say they are, can cause harm. That if you start with the assumption that it can be deconstructed, you may cause harm. Questions or comments about that? Yes, Tasha.
I actually have a personal experience with that a little bit. So I've gone to therapy for myself like 4 times.
Every good therapist does, by the way.
The first time I went, I was young. My brother my stepdad was emotionally abusive to my brother, who was his stepson as well. And it had escalated really badly. Really, really badly. And so I had learned to bottle everything in and keep things hidden super well. Really good at it. So, and I would bursting at the seam. I needed to go talk to somebody. I knew it. And all I had was, the guy just gave me assumptions. So the first assumption he gave was that, okay, so you need to talk. So as a person who's never talked to anybody about your problems, you should go to group therapy, which worked really well. So, and then the next one was, okay, well, I'm not really going to talk about this, so let's talk about being mixed and how that's going to be, and possible problems that might entail with that. And I was like, well, this is a nice article. I always wanted this article, and I'll keep it because it's cool. I've been looking for this one, but that's not what I came for. That's not my problem. I have a strong identity. I'm fine. And focusing on the wrong problem, like assuming that this is a problem, assuming that this is how this problem is going to evolve, means that you might miss a huge concern.
The way that therapist did.
I know that concern addressed for another 2 years, and at the very least, and continue to with a couple other therapists, and that was a big miss.
Not helpful.
No.
For what you needed. Good example. Holly, did your hand almost go up?
Well, yeah, it was kind of on some of them a little bit ahead or above it. But kind of I guess it's just been some of the examples that have been used as direct or indirect manipulation or coercion. I think we have to be careful, because you can say one thing in a certain tone of voice or way of doing it that is that, whereas there's other ways you can, just even the example with the bishop, right? Because if I have a client that wants to be actively LDS, that's a key piece of who they are, right? And I think there needs to be space to explore with them what would it be like, but to have it be open, not saying you have to,
or you
have to do what your bishop says, because sometimes I think bishops make messes of things sometimes.
So what would that be like is the best question.
Yeah, and then how to do that. And I think that's okay to do. I don't know, I guess there's some of me that's like, I don't think I've been manipulating or coercive, and I think I've been careful in that. I don't know. That's just, but maybe even a question is, maybe I am doing some of that without realizing it.
Hard to know.
Yeah.
I
was just gonna add to that, kind of going back to the bishop thing, is it doesn't even matter your intentions. It matters how they would see that. So for example, I often ask my clients, oh, did you talk to your bishop? Now I'm asking because people typically have bad experiences with their bishop sometimes. And so I'm trying to mitigate that and assess that. But I have to be very careful because it can come across as, yep.
Yep, and no matter what you do, it can come across that way. Yeah.
I just want to say how much I appreciate your group and these, like, how you have the gender identity, sexual orientation, or also the faith outcome. Or, you know, it can be harmful if you're basing treatment on assumptions of same-sex attraction, gender diversity, or a deep devotion to faith. And I love how uniting that is, because it's taking these opposite groups and opposite ways of thinking and lifestyles sometimes, and kind of saying, hey, maybe sometimes we do this to each other, and it's not just one side or another side, but that it can be harmful both ways. And I love the kind of unity that's promoting, and I appreciate that.
Makes a level playing field, doesn't
Can I
it?
say something to that? This isn't a criticism of what you said, but it's interesting that we look at it as the opposite sides.
Well, that's how our group came together.
Well, it was the catalyst, but I think part of it is, again, I think it's an inclusive picture.
It is. I think that's why Nikki likes it, because it's inclusive.
Well, and I think for me, so I am coming from raised LDS, and you know, I live in Utah. I haven't always, but I have for a while. And so I came into this thinking, how can I be more open and aware? But I hadn't ever thought, honestly, the other way around, kind of like what you said earlier when you said, you know, sometimes an LGBTQ therapist could do that to someone coming in with faith-based, and I had never honestly thought of it, like, switch the other way. I may be hyper aware of it from my side, but I just hadn't ever thought of it the other way around. So
It's really important to get those signs, isn't it? We had a therapist who wanted to work at Encircle who said, you know, religion's going to be bad for all these kids. I said, well, thank you, but no thank you. Matt, do you want to read the next 3?
Urging the client to discard deeply held beliefs about religion, faith, sexuality, or gender. Failing to spend adequate time assessing the client's unique experience with religion, faith, sexuality, or gender. Failing to explore family systems and cultural and ethnic traditions.
Wow. Questions or comments on these? Sammy.
I just, when I hear a client express a belief about religion, faith, sexuality, or gender that kind of like brings some dissonance up in me, and it's hard to determine whether that's because I personally think it's unhealthy or objectively it's unhealthy, right? Like, for example, one who really identifies as gay and said, but of course I want to like marry a woman. And having me, like, when I'm challenging that belief, I want to make sure I'm not urging them to discard it, but like trying to, so is it just best to come with an attitude of curiosity? Like, help me understand why that sounds really important to you. Help me
Tell me more about
that. Because I want to make sure that I'm not on the side, and I had to be really clear the other day with one client. I was like, I know it sounds like I'm trying to push you in any direction. I want to make sure, you know, I'm not. But I am curious about why, like, if you want to choose this, making sure that that's because that's what you want, kind of thing. And so that curiosity and that just like exploring mentality.
Yes, and in a lot of mental health situations, we like to challenge clients who say, I could never do this, or the rule I have for my life is this, and we might say, why? Like, we'll just challenge that right off. In situations like this, if someone says, this is where I'm coming from, if we say, why? As a totally different context and effect, it communicates perhaps a lack of respect, and that's maybe what they're most afraid of. So, yeah, I have to watch that. Let's do failing to inquire do you want to, I didn't catch your name.
I'm Heidi.
Heidi, do you want to read the next three?
Okay, sorry, I'm reading on the paper. So which
Paper's
ones do you want me to
good,
do?
paper's
But they're
good.
different, so.
Are
They're like different orders. And
We
Yeah.
just
Yes.
updated it, so it's.
Read any
I
three
failed to
you
update
want.
the slide
I'll
to
just
the.
go failing to inquire periodically, is that?
That's good.
Failing to inquire periodically with clients about their feelings regarding their therapy. If they feel understood, or if necessary, making adjustments to the therapeutic process, or making a referral to a more suitable therapist. Failing to examine the provider's own preconceptions about the possibility of positive mental health for clients in their current or preferred relationship, single status.
That was a little more complicated. Let's talk about that one for just a moment. Did you find your mind going, what? What are you talking about? What does that mean? So the possibility of positive mental health for a client who comes to you in an open relationship, comes to you in a mixed orientation marriage, comes to you in a same-sex marriage. If you have a preconceived notion about whether these people can be happy, and you fail to examine that and be able to set some of it aside in order for the client to self-determine, you may cause harm.
Can I say something about
Yes.
that? So as sort of an outgrowth relation, as sort of an outgrowth, but within and without the group, there was some members of the group and some members outside the group that decided to do a collaborative study in the spirit of this kind of collaborative dialogue that we've been doing. And we called it the 4-option survey. And out of that, we were looking at kind of 4 major life paths, like single and celibate, single sexually active, mixed orientation relationship or opposite sex relationship, same-sex relationship. And part of in this sort of spirit of collaboration, it was to say, okay, we're not going to make value judgments about what relationship or what kind of relationship status or single status somebody should be in, but are there things that we can tell about the profile of individuals who are satisfied in each one of these categories. And there were individuals in every single one of these 4 major groups who were highly satisfied, and there were individuals in every single one of those groups who were highly dissatisfied, and then everywhere kind of along the spectrum. And then part of this was to say, okay, are there things that we can tell about people in the profile of individuals who might be more likely to be happy in one of the, or to experience life satisfaction in one of these? Or when we look at the profile of those who are highly satisfied, if there is someone who's committed to one of those life options, are there things that we know about how you could do that healthily to increase health and satisfaction within that option? But again, in every single one of those, 80%, and this will even just the mixed orientation relationship piece, 80% of those who were in an opposite-sex relationship reported being satisfied. And again, that's those who are currently married. That's not to say, obviously those who are highly dissatisfied or divorced were not in that option. But every single one of those, there were people who were single and celibate who were highly satisfied, people who were single and celibate who were highly dissatisfied. And so being really careful about the judgments that we make. If someone thinks, I just don't see how you could ever be happy in a same-sex relationship, is a judgment that the research just doesn't support, right? And so we have to be really careful about how we're assessing the possibilities for someone being satisfied and how they navigate this. Across the board, right?
Sweet. Tasha, you want, let's do Heidi one more and then Tasha, you read. Limiting the clients.
Limiting the client's exploration of sexual orientation, gender, personal values, or faith.
Nice job. Tasha?
Violating the sexual boundaries of the client, such as using nudity in sessions.
In case you were wondering. Okay, and then we have some terms that we've defined on that paper if you want that. I would propose instead of the clinical vignettes, we maybe spend a few minutes talking about what questions have not been answered, things that people might be concerned about or that have been raised for them that, wait, they're not going to discuss this? Now I have to go home. Yes, Ashley.
I'm wondering if you can send out information for how we can be a part of this and be active and ways that we can be a part of the community and get involved, because as I'm a lot of stuff is coming up and I feel like would maybe be easier to process if this is a continual thing in my life rather than I had a lecture, let me think about this for the next 4 years.
Back in 2018.
Yeah.
Yes, there are a number of really lovely things. First of all, the LGBTQ Affirmative Therapists Guild that you've heard about from Jim Strube. Then we have North Star that Ty started, and that's one of the reasons lots of parents want to bring their kids to Ty. you want to say anything about North Star and about why people want their kids to be like you?
Well, I mean, it's North Star as an organization is specifically there to support people who are trying to navigate this within the church. And again, you know, there's obviously sensitivities around that because some parents have goals or a vision for their child's lives that the children do not share, you know, and so there's always going to be sensitivities in how those get navigated that we try to be very careful about. But again, for those who are kind of self-electing to try to navigate this within the church, that's a resource. If someone
And they have
doesn't
a
want
conference that you can
I went
go
part of
to.
it this year.
Did you?
and it was
In March?
awesome. Yeah,
Awesome.
really good.
That's great.
Yeah, we have an annual conference typically in March. We haven't set dates for 2019, but it's a pretty large conference, and a lot of it's the workshops tend to be breakouts for parents, priesthood leaders, individuals, spouses. I mean, we have had a youth track for the last 2 years or 3 years. 2 years. So there's a lot of resources there for that, specifically for that kind of subpopulation.
So really great way to be involved and hear and feel what's going on within this community. Also, there's the organization Affirmation International, which, 20 some years ago when it started, it pretty much catered to LGBT or LG members, lesbian, gay members, who had left the church, but their ministry is now toward people who are also keeping their journey within the church. So their conference is in 2 weeks, Affirmation, July 16th, 17th, something like that. There's also a number of Facebook pages that you can join and be part of the conversation about what LGBT members are experiencing. When Ty and I gave a presentation to AMCAP, the Association of Mormon Counselors and Psychotherapists, we gave them a list of organizations that you can reach out and be part of in order to keep tabs on this community. You can always volunteer at Encircle.
Us, that would be ladies.
Okay. Yeah, Jonathan's not here, but I'll send it to Jonathan and say people asked about it. Lauren? Oh, Lauren's here. Lauren can do anything. Yes, Jim.
And something else you might want to think about doing is learning at this level when you're still kind of emerging as a student to form peer groups or peer consultation groups where you get, and even take our document or other things you could read and begin to do it, or bring clinical work that you're learning in your placements to do that. And you might even think about contacting someone like Jerry or someone and do something with students from another university that might be coming from a different background. And seek out some people who would be different and say, we're social workers, we're marriage and family therapists, we're in a different setting, would you want to do, whether by Facebook or in person? Yeah, almost foreign exchange. So learning to do that, because that's going to serve you really well as you go through the rest of your career, to begin to really build ongoing consultation supervision into your work as a therapist.
And quickly, I just said about Encircle, but Encircle is a public building in Provo, just south of the City Center Temple, and anybody can come take a tour and figure out how you can be involved and volunteer in 2 hours a quarter or whatever, 20 hours a week. We've got just a million different kinds of opportunities, and that's a way to actually rub shoulders, talk, and be part of that community too.
Rub shoulders there.
Only in certain respects. Other questions, things that you wish we would talk about before we're done in 2 minutes? Going once. Last words from anybody here then?
I want to, I'll say something. I think what's interesting is when I look at these from a social work lens, from like a social justice lens, I think it's interesting how divisive our world has become. Reparative versus affirmative, Democrat, Republican, Mormon, non-Mormon, right? And there's all these like opposites. And I like to think of this project and my work as a therapist as well as a social worker is that somewhere the broader narrative about our society is that we all carry a relevant piece to the overall tapestry of what we're creating. And I think if we could do that, there's a much larger possibility of everyone getting along and coexisting peacefully.
Things that cause great conflict are the opportunities for the greatest bridge. And that bridge can be a miracle that can enlighten life, bring new hope where it didn't even exist before. Thanks for letting us come.